Why are some people found wandering mindlessly through the wild, with some seemingly vanishing into thin air? Zombies are often the subject matter of nightmares and horror movies, but are there more to these tales than people realize? Could their instinctual desire to burrow be one reason why we don't find them? Are some people more susceptible than others? As far-fetched as these ideas seem, if you ignore the survival video, you could become one of the hundreds that go missing every year. Today on Rat and Cat, real-life zombies, odd things that kill people in the wild, and how to avoid them. Nakia here, and this is Rat and Cat, where we look at stories of people who have gone missing so others can learn how to survive. Today on Rat and Cat, we are going to explore the bizarre effects of exposure and how it turns ordinary people into mindless zombies driven to burrow like an animal and then get naked. I should clarify, these zombies don't appear to be looking for brains. It's more like they're on autopilot to nowhere. Now, many of you know this behavior as exposure or hypothermia, but if you start looking at the facts and the stories of people who have gone missing, you'll start to see a common pattern that does resemble a mindless zombie. In any case, there are some odd twists when these people are found. You may have heard the tragic story of the Kims, a family of 4 who mysteriously disappeared on their way to the coast near Grants Pass, Oregon in November 2006. 9 days later, the wife and girls were found alive, lost in a maze of logging roads, their car buried deep in snow. But the father, James Kim, had set out on foot to find help. On day 10, the searchers found some of his belongings, including his pants. Then, on day 12, the search came to an end. James Kim's body was found in Big Windy Creek. Kim's behavior was odd. Why did he choose to leave the road and make his way 5 miles down a rugged canyon before perishing? And why did he remove his pants and other clothing? Here's another one. In the spring of 2016, 19-year-old Dustin Self from Oklahoma drove to Steen Mountain, Oregon, abandoned his truck and survival gear, and mysteriously vanished into the forest. That fall, some hunters were pursuing a deer into a thicket when they came across Self's body. He had stripped off his clothes and hunkered down in a thicket. Then there's the hunter who went missing just a few weeks ago here in Skamania County, Washington. 37-year-old Joe Pestler from Vancouver, Washington had hunted near Forlorn Lakes many times, so it was odd that he went missing. Local authorities had given up the search, actually, when they got lucky. A warm break in the weather melted much of the snow that had accumulated when Pestler went missing, making the area more accessible. The new search effort found Pestler just 300 feet from his truck, with his parka, gloves, and backpack scattered around nearby. Now, these are just a few regional stories. You've probably heard other stories. Trails of clothes through the forest, maybe the clothes are folded or the shoes found side by side, and sometimes the body is never found at all. Sometimes the victims mindlessly cross roads only to die in entirely different sections of the wilderness than they started in. And sometimes their shoes are found miles from them, but their feet are completely unharmed. What is even more bizarre, and something we'll look at a little later, is that in nearly 25% of the cases when the body is found, it appears that they've tried to burrow like an animal. This causes some people to speculate, including some commenters on my blog here, Rat and Cat, about the cause of this behavior. Could these strange occurrences be caused by something supernatural? Is there some strange creature in the forest taking people? Could it be Sasquatch or an alien abduction? Certainly people like David Paulides, author of Missing 411, have made these ideas more popular. Though he claims not to, he often insinuates that something strange or unknown is causing people to disappear in the national parks. One could say there's even a government conspiracy. The Center for Disease Control has been studying this for years. There are over 1,300 documented cases of this every year, with the number of annual cases increasing over the last decade. Maybe Paulides is right. Maybe there is something strange that's causing people to disappear. But what if it's not some virus or supernatural force? Is the way Pestler and the others died strange? Yes. Is it supernatural? Probably not. You see, hunters and wilderness explorers and rescue teams around the world have seen countless cases of hypothermia. But why get naked? Why burrow? To understand that, let's look at how the body reacts to cold. When your body temperature drops, your heart and nervous system and other organs can't work normally. You start to shiver, your speech can slur, your breath slows, and you get clumsy and tired. Confusion and memory loss set in, and your skin turns bright red. Left untreated, hypothermia can quickly lead to complete failure of your heart and respiratory system, which of course leads to death. Alcohol can make the situation worse because alcohol makes you feel warm when you're not and dulls your senses. In fact, most people don't know they're becoming hypothermic. Unprotected skin, direct contact with wet clothes, or the cold ground and exposure to wind are all mechanisms that cause your body to rapidly lose body heat. But what's really strange is the two final stages of hypothermia. Warm-blooded hibernating animals often dig a burrow to keep warm. With advanced hypothermia, most of your brain shuts down and the autonomous functions of your brainstem take over. That's why victims of hypothermia are often found under or near logs or in thickets. It's called terminal burrowing. Elderly people and children who have gotten hypothermia in a cold home have been found burrowed in their closet shelves or under their bed, mimicking the behavior of a hibernating animal. In fact, terminal burrowing is likely the factor in why we haven't been able to find Christopher Zisowitz or Austin Oldfield, the cold cases I've been working on over the last year. The big lava bed, for example, is filled with countless potholes, pits, cracks, and ledges that would be perfectly instinctual to crawl into, and very difficult for someone else to find. But as strange as terminal burrowing seems, taking off your clothes in the bitter cold seems even more bizarre. But that's what often happens. It's what's known as paradoxical undressing. When you're extremely cold, all your blood vessels in your extremities constrict to keep your external organs warm. But eventually those muscles become exhausted and fail. Blood rushes back to your extremities. And in severe hypothermia, you feel these hot flashes like you're burning up, you're on fire. That's when people remove their clothes. Paradoxical undressing usually precedes terminal burrowing. Some supernaturalists find it mysterious that some people have gone miles in bare feet but have no abrasions. But researchers in Germany found that during terminal burrowing, victims often crawl on their hands and knees rather than walk. Still, how can an experienced hunter like Pressler fall victim to simply getting too cold? It appears that Pressler underestimated the weather. Once you've gone on hundreds of wilderness adventures, it's easy to think, no sweat. I've done this before. I can take care of myself. That's when you're in the greatest danger of overlooking the simplest essentials, like good waterproof shoes and pants. In Pressler's case, it appears he was in about 36 inches of snow, without snowshoes or skis. In that scenario, he would have been sinking nearly to his waist in every footstep, basically wallowing deep in wet snow. Now, there's no way you're going to get out of that without being soaked to the bone, both from exterior moisture and from the sweat because you've been working so hard. In addition, the Cascade Mountains where Pressler was hunting have a very damp atmosphere. The wet 30 to 45 degree temperature in effect feels much colder than the same temperature would further inland because it tends to be a cooler and chill you to the bone faster. But are some people prone to this condition? And what should you do to stop becoming a zombie? In cold, wet conditions, always have shelter, a warm sleeping bag, and a dry set of clothes with you. If you feel yourself start to shake, don't wait for your mind to start to go. Get out of your wet clothes immediately and into dry shelter. In fact, that's what paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing are all about. After your brain shuts down, your autonomous brain stem is telling you to get out of those wet clothes and find a dry place. But be cautious if you find someone who's in advanced hypothermia, as moving them can be fatal. I recently spoke with Wind River Search and Rescue volunteer John Carlson about that topic.
Hypothermia is one of the hazards that you're going to face in the backcountry around here, the Gifford Pinchot, and really anywhere. It's a very insidious hazard in that it tends to take away your most important survival tool when you need it the most, which is your brain. As your body core cools, all sorts of functions start to slow down, including your thought process. So you're going to start making really bad decisions. You're also going to get clumsy and uncoordinated. An example of that is several years ago we had a gentleman on the 90 road. It's in the spring, but the roads were still closed by snow. The 90 road is plowed up through Northwoods and then up the Curly Creek Road to Wind River Highway down through Carson. East of there, it's not, and he had driven up there and gotten his truck stuck. So he walked out, got a ride down, got some stuff to help get the truck out, got a ride back up. They dropped him off. He headed up to his truck, and didn't come back out. So the next day they called, and we went out to look for him. And we were driving down the Curly Creek Road. We got to 90 Road, and we noticed footprints westbound coming out of the snow. And we looked, we understood what kind of, he had Danner boots with the rounded features on the soles, and those matched the description that we had. So we were relatively confident this was our guy, and he had walked out. So as we're driving, there's still snow left where they had plowed, and we're watching his tracks. And when he first hit the road, you could tell he was foundering a little bit in the snow, but when he hit the road, where it was just skiffs of snow, his gait normalized, and he started just walking, and it's like what you would expect to see someone walking down the road. But within a very short time, we started to see changes in his track pattern. His gait lessened. He started to do a little bit of weaving. It almost looked like he was getting drunk and staggering. And it got to the point where we finally lost the tracks because the road had cleared, is that he was all over the place, and it was amazing. He was still on his feet. Fortunately, he stayed on his feet until he got down into the Northwoods area and was able to obtain some help, and he survived that thing. But it was eerily instructive to look at that pattern of his walking left just by his tracks in the snow, and you could just see written out there in those tracks what hypothermia does to you and how dangerous it is. And there's no way that he probably even knew that he was wobbling or stumbling or winding back and forth, shuffling, and that's just the sign of how bad this is and how quickly it can cause someone to have a particularly bad day.
Now, a lot of people think it's mysterious how people will wander off into the forest and they'll find their clothes strewn out behind them, and sometimes even folded. And it just seems really odd, but
it is very odd, but it happens. It also happens that people can be found deceased sitting next to a full backpack that had a tent, a stove, a sleeping bag, food, water, everything they needed to survive, and they just didn't avail themselves of it because they didn't intervene fast enough. And hypothermia is insidious enough that you get to a point, if you start shaking and you're shivering, that's a danger sign, and you should pay attention to that. If you can't control your shivering, stop and change something. Get dry clothes, build a fire, do something at that point to start to combat that cooling of your body core. Because it isn't long after that you start making really bad decisions, and finally you get to the point where you're really not making any decisions. You don't have any input to the situation. Hypothermia is taken over, and unless someone else intervenes, it's probably going to end badly. I was on a search up in the Mount Rainier area, and it's very strange. We came across an article of clothing. It was a glove, just laying there, and there were tracks. And so we figured, okay, well, we're on the guy. And then we started seeing more articles of clothing. And this was like day 3 of the search. And we came across more clothing, and we finally got to where the gentleman had not survived, and he had removed most of his clothing. The physiology of that, I don't know that I understand, but apparently in the terminal final stages of hypothermia, you start to feel hot, or some irrationality causes you to just start shedding clothes. The other thing to know about hypothermia for search and rescue, we generally say that you're not dead until you're warm and dead. If we find someone who's severely hypothermic, we're going to treat them as if they're recoverable, and we're going to be very gentle with them, no movements, because if the blood has in fact shunted away from your extremities, there will still be blood there, but it pools and cools. And so if you pick someone up and get them walking, or even just handle them roughly, and that blood makes its way back into your core and cold blood hits your heart, you can have a cardiac event that you're not going to survive. So we always treat hypothermic patients very cautiously and get them into medical care that they can be medically warmed back up as soon as you can.
Would you be okay with recounting that story about the church group?
I can. Just I preface it with I don't remember all the details, but in broad strokes what happened was a church group, including kids, went up on Mount Hood, apparently got caught in a storm. I think they built a snow cave so that they survived it, but they were getting cold. They were getting very hypothermic. When either the storm passed and they started to walk out, or searchers got to them, I think it was the searchers got to them, and this is years ago, they got them and everyone's elated because, you know, they've been found and they're alive, and they started walking them out and the kids just started dying, literally just dropping dead because that cold blood had come in and they shouldn't have been walking, but people didn't know that then. And that was one of the, you know, hideous learning experiences on the route to understanding, to the degree that we do, how hypothermia affects the human body. It was a very tragic story.
If you do find someone in advanced hypothermia, first call for help. Research suggests skin-to-skin transference of warmth is the best method for recovery. Until help arrives, get the victim and yourself into a dry, warm place, like a tent and sleeping bag. Then remove as much of your clothes and their clothes as you can in order to have efficient body heat transfer. Clothing in between you acts as insulation and slows that transfer. So are some people more susceptible than others? Yes. In the book Lost Person Behavior, a search and rescue guide written by Robert J. Coaster, Coaster points out that one reason some people, men especially, cross roads when they're lost is because they don't want to admit they're going in the wrong direction. That's pride. And pride is usually driven by fear. The amygdala is the integrative center for emotions, emotional behavior and motivation, and causes intense emotions such as pleasure, aggression, and fear. Everything we experience is filtered through the amygdala. Far too many people are operating through a filter of fear. This can often be exhibited as overconfidence, an aggression, or anxiety, or timidity. It could be based on a simple mindset like growing up in a culture of fear or a traumatic experience. Even an oppressive work ethic can lead to a fear of failure. My point is, someone who is operating through a filter of fear is more likely to react with fear or pride in a situation than someone who is aware of their changing surroundings and emotions and knows their limits and is able to make and execute a plan in a dire situation. Basically, keeping a level head is key to survival. What about you? I'd like to hear any stories you might have about dealing with exposure and hypothermia. Have you had a close call? What worked for you? I'd like to hear your stories in the comments below. And join me again next week here on Rat and Cat, where we look at stories about people who have gone missing so that others can learn how to survive.
That's a deep subject right there. Everybody's got an opinion about that, you know. Been years worth of research, and